It began, as many great shifts in global policy do, not with a grand speech from a podium, but with a late-night post from the President of the United States. It is midnight. Billions of dollars in tariffs are now flowing into the United States of America. With those words, President Donald Trump signaled the beginning of a sweeping transformation in international trade policy. The tariffs, ranging from 10 to 41%, now apply to nearly 70 countries. It marks the most significant tariff increase the United States has seen in nearly 100 years. The ramifications, however, are not merely economic. This is not about trade alone. This is about leverage, about power, and about reshaping global alliances under a different kind of pressure. The highest tariffs are aimed at countries on the periphery of American strategic interests but central to larger conflicts. Laos and Myanmar face 40%, Syria 41%. While the value of goods imported from these nations is relatively minor, the political signal is loud and deliberate. This is economic signaling, not fiscal necessity. It is about message, not margin. At the heart of the policy lies a sharp pivot toward punitive economic deterrence. And few countries are more directly targeted than India. With two separate 25% tariffs applied to Indian imports and specifically to Indian purchases of Russian oil, the Trump administration is making clear that neutrality in the Ukraine conflict will not be tolerated. This is a second-term president, acting with the full weight of executive authority, deploying financial instruments not only as tools of negotiation, but as weapons of war by other means. India, now the single largest buyer of Russian oil, became indispensable to Moscow after its invasion of Ukraine. Before the war began in early 2022, India's imports of Russian oil were minimal. Since then, nearly 38% of Russian crude flows to the subcontinent. That revenue underwrites Moscow's war effort, and in Washington, that equation is no longer acceptable. The United States is not sending troops to Ukraine. It is sending pressure points, sanctions, secondary sanctions, and now, direct tariffs on countries financing the Kremlin's economy. The logic is simple. If India continues to purchase discounted Russian oil, and if that oil fuels a military conflict that threatens European security, then India will bear the cost. The strategy is not merely economic, it is psychological. President Trump's track record matters in this calculus. When he gave Iran 60 days to accept a deal, he authorized Israeli military action on day 61. This is not a presidency known for symbolic threats. It is a presidency that escalates. And in this moment, the message to India and to Russia is that delay is not a shield. But this campaign of pressure did not end with tariffs. In a move both unexpected and unprecedented, Trump's special envoy traveled directly to Moscow. Steve Whit, a close foreign policy advisor, held face-to-face talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, the first high-level American contact of its kind since the height of the Ukraine war. The substance of the meeting remains opaque, but the symbolism is unmistakable. Trump later told reporters, "We had some very good talks with President Putin today, and there is a very good chance that we could be ending that road." Ending that road. The phrase is ambiguous, but the intent is clear. The United States is reopening the negotiation channel not to offer compromise, but to impose terms. Within the same news cycle, Congressman Rich McCormick, a member of both the House Armed Services Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee, underlined the stakes. Speaking candidly, he described Russia's war strategy as attritional driven by demographics and GDP. According to McCormick, President Putin believes time is on his side. But Washington is changing the clock. The congressman pointed out that by choking Russia's financial lifelines and arming Ukraine with increasingly advanced defensive capabilities, the United States is moving toward a different endgame, one that does not involve boots on the ground, but one that may still achieve strategic victory. His logic was grounded in cold arithmetic. Russia has 5 times the population and 10 times the economic size of Ukraine. Yet years into the war, the map has barely shifted. The front lines remain largely static. That, in itself, is a form of defeat from Moscow. And yet, McCormick noted, Russia may still refuse to yield. The territories it has seized in eastern Ukraine and the Crimean Peninsula remain sticking points. Any negotiated settlement will likely hinge on these regions. But Ukraine's own calculations are not purely territorial. They are existential. For President Zelensky and his government, the fight is no longer about reclaiming land. It is about survival as a sovereign nation. Ukraine, as McCormick emphasized, is not merely a battleground. It is a country rich in natural resources, a top 5 nation in terms of strategic reserves. Whoever controls Ukraine controls its future, and the potential to export that future to allies or adversaries. This is where the conflict transcends borders. If Russia controls Ukraine, it gains not only land, but influence. That influence could be weaponized, exported to regimes in North Korea, in Iran, in China. It could alter the balance of power across multiple regions, creating supply chains that are politically driven and strategically hostile. For the United States, allowing that outcome is not acceptable. And that is why the tariffs matter. That is why the envoy matters. That is why, in the words of the president, this is only the beginning. The conflict in Ukraine may have started with tanks, but it could end with trade. The battlefield may still roar, but the balance of power is being measured in cargo manifests, in energy flows, in economic concessions, and in the end, it will not be the soldier, but the strategist who defines what victory looks like. As the dust settles on Trump's announcement, the reactions ripple across capitals worldwide. In Brussels, officials quietly reassess the transatlantic alliance. In Beijing, economists model worst-case outcomes if Chinese exports are added to the list. In New Delhi, policymakers scramble to balance oil supply with diplomatic fallout. The world, once again, is realigning itself around the decisions of the United States. But this is not simply about tariffs. It is about intent. And intent in geopolitics is power. If the objective is to suffocate Russian capacity to wage war, then the pipeline of funds from India is a critical artery. If the goal is to fracture alliances between authoritarian regimes, then pressure on India becomes a wedge. If the outcome sought is not just the end of a war, but the rewriting of global economic dependencies, then this is only stage 1. Tariffs, in this sense, are not fiscal policy, they are doctrine. And as American consumers begin to feel the ripple effects an 18% average increase in the cost of imports, the question is not whether the price is high, but whether the objective is worth it. In Washington, the answer is increasingly yes. Trump's doctrine, transactional, confrontational, and kinetic, is now shaping not just trade policy, but the architecture of global order. The tariffs are levers. The sanctions are pressure valves. The diplomacy is a countdown. And the world is listening, even if it does not yet know how to respond. What comes next depends on how long Russia can endure, how far India is willing to adapt, and how precisely the United States is willing to push. For now, all signs suggest this is not the end of American pressure, but the overture to something larger. The war in Ukraine has destabilized the European continent. It has redefined security policy in NATO. It has exposed supply chain vulnerabilities across the globe. But most importantly, it has revealed that economic warfare is no longer a subset of military strategy. It is now the first move on the chessboard. This is cold logic. And in this world, words are warning shots. Tariffs are weapons. And silence is rarely neutral.